Okay, welcome back to my A series gearbox strip down. This is part 3, and we stopped last time when we'd taken off the bearing, the roller bearing off of the input shaft that sits on the front of the input gear. We realised that, or I realised that the nut that needed to come off, which was on the opposite side, having taken the pinion nut off, or undone the pinion nut whilst it was locked up. We need to take this one off. We realised we didn't have the right size socket. It's a 1 1/8 inch AF socket. So posted up in my gearbox strip down build, which is part of my Metro project, 1275 project, and was given a link to a company called Zorro. Ordered one. It's a Kennedy socket. It came through really quickly, even though in the current lockdown climate. So that arrived. I also saw a list of a few AF sockets that you also needed that John Guest had put up on a gearbox strip down guide, and in a frenzy ordered a set of Sealy AF sockets, only to find after I'd placed the order that I probably had most of them anyway in my Halfords advanced socket set. So I'm sure they'll come in handy, or I will put them up for sale. What else have we've been doing in the meantime is I've went through a few parts that I've got for the engine project and that I hadn't touched. I just wanted to check that which ones needed cleaning, which ones needed to be replaced, etc., which ones could go again. And I took a picture of the primary gear. Primary gear sits here in the transfer case and is connected up in what I think is called the drop gear set, which consists of three gears. So I put a picture up on the mini forums on the project thread, and only to be told that more worrying rather than the bushes, more worrying was the groove around this area here. This is where the primary gear oil seal sits. Now I have taken some advice on it, and there are a couple of options, but what I wanted to do was get my head around exactly what causes the issue and how it works. So basically the transfer case, which got the oil seal inside, sits on the front of the gearbox and joins the gearbox and the block, and the primary gear sits through like this, and the seal, where the seal runs around, there must have been some grit, some wet metal filings or whatever, and eventually just wears away a small groove onto the inside the primary gear. Now the options are buy new gear. They're about £120. Not actually new, they're refurbished. The problem is then you've got to measure your crankshaft and make sure that the bushings are reamed and out to the correct size. Obviously, apart from the cost, this second option is well, send this one up to get this one reground, which is a slightly cheaper, about £80 to £90. Or what some people are suggesting is that you can actually adjust where the seal sits on the groove, thereby allowing the oil seal to sit in a slightly different position, because some people have said this one seems quite far back compared to some. So I spent some time, like I said, putting it together to work out exactly how it works. And what's being suggested is that when you fit the oil seal, which is tapped in from this side, so you're building up the engine, put the transfer case on, put the seal in after the primary gear's on, and the bushing that sits behind it, and instead of tapping down the seal all the way, this one is slightly lower than the groove, is actually being suggested you've got about a 1.5mm of play, is actually not tapping it all the way in. Now my concern with that is that how do you know when it's down far enough? I suppose it is doable, but the other option is what I'm sort of investigating is obviously there's a recess here that the oil seal sits on. Well, I think there is. I won't know until I take it off, sort of do some measuring. and potentially having some sort of spacer made up of the correct thickness, so that you can have the spacer in there, tap the oil seal in, seat it home, and it will be sitting out proud enough to sit on a different part of the primary gear area where the oil seal goes. So we'll have a look at that in due course, but otherwise we'll have to bite the bullet and either get this reground or buy a new one. The issue that some people are saying is with current bushes that are fitted are not as good as the Diva ones, and it's being suggested that they could cause binding trouble later on, binding on the flywheel. But as with anything on the internet, there's always differing opinions. So we're going to get on with the strip down from where we were, and we'll see how we get on. So next part of the video then involves undoing this nut and taking off the input gear. I did take a short video of undoing the nut with the 1 1/8 socket whilst it was screwed down to the wood, which we used to undo the 150-pound pinion nut. I didn't need a scaffold bar, I only need my 600mm breaker bar, a little bit of pressure, and off it came. So now that that nut's undone, you just unscrew it. There's a slight bit of damage to it from when I took the lock tabs off, so probably have to file that down, but that'll probably go again. And this nut just pulls off there, and we'll pop that over here and get reused, and then we can turn the gearbox over and look at the next step to do. Okay, so the next step is, now that we've got the pinion nut off and this special washer, not quite sure what that's called, there are inside here 3 bolts. There are 4 holes, but they omitted one of the bolts due to this plate breaking. So we're going to knock the lock taps down, and then we've got to undo the nuts. And I think one of the lock tabs is already knocked down. I might have done that already, so we'll do that. The time lapse, we'll undo those nuts, and then we'll move on. What I want to show you here is what I've taken off so far. So from one side, we took off the input shaft nut, the one that was on the opposite side to the pinion nut, which wasn't hard. So I've labelled that up, and I've also labelled up the input gear that sat behind it. It comes with a lock tab which sits in. That'll get replaced. The input gear will go again. Input shaft not sure. Then we've got the idler gear, which I took off earlier, which has got the 2 bushes on either side. We've got to check those, just make sure that's okay. That'll go again. Then we've got the pinion nut, and sitting behind the pinion nut there's a dished washer, which has got a bit of corrosion on it, to be honest. Not sure how that would get corroded inside the gearbox, but this has been sitting around for a long time on the car. So we'll clean that up, maybe in our citric acid bath, see how it comes up. But if it's pitted, then we'll probably replace it. It may even come in the gearbox rebuild kit. And then we just slid off the pinion gear. If you remember, the pinion gear is what meets up with the differential, and this is going to get replaced for a different sized pinion gear. This was a 2.95 ratio, which was a, well, we're here, remember, 59 tooth diff and a 20, can't read it, 26 or 28 tooth pinion. But anyway, it's a 2.95 ratio, so they'll both get replaced. Pop this back in. We'll keep all this safe without damaging anything. Put that away in a second. So the last piece I want to show you is the retainer. And in the Classic Mini DIY video, he suggests that there is a spacer behind, or a shim, that allows you to adjust the end float. So this is a retainer that holds the pinion nut in, and this one didn't have a shim. There's no shim on here, stuck on here, and I checked in here. There's nothing up against the facing. So we'll investigate that, and then we'll move on.